Hello there. Today, you're going to watch probably the most important video out of this entire crash course. Today, I'm gonna give you a high-level overview of every single step that an HTTP request goes through inside Phoenix in order to render a response to the end user. And at the end of the video, we're going to create two endpoints. One to list all the products from our e-commerce store, and the second one to show the details of our specific product that the user is searching. So let's start. If we are working with a web server, what exactly does a web server do? Well, it's just a piece of code that responds to an HTTP request, right? That's pretty much what a web server is. And what is a request? An HTTP request consists of three attributes. We have a verb, which is get, post, put, delete. Usually we use get to retrieve data, and then post, put, delete to create or edit a specific instance on our database. Then we have the base URL, which on our case is localhost on port 4000. And then we have the path. Here, if we're just using the slash, that means that we want to get the home page. We can also have slash products to list all the products. We can have slash products slash Overwatch if you want to specifically query the details of Overwatch only. And on the final example, if I want to create a product, then instead of a get, I can send a post to slash products, okay? Now let's assume that our Phoenix server got one request. Who is responsible for dealing with the request? We have the endpoint, which gets the request, and then I'm gonna show you on the code. Let me open up VS Code. The first step is actually inside shop web, we have endpoint. This endpoint here is going to run a bunch of things, and once it finishes running all the plugs, and we're gonna have a dedicated video about plugs, then it goes, the final step here is the router. And then inside the router is where you can choose what you're going to do with the request. Typically, the router maps the request to a specific controller and a specific action. So here, as an example, if I open up router, you can ignore the pipeline for now. You can scroll down and go to this scope. We have one route. We have a get request that goes to the root. And on this URL, we're going to use the page controller. And inside the page controller, we're going to call a function called home. And this home is what we call action from the controller. Now, as another example, we're going to do this soon. We're going to create a product controller, and then inside that controller, we're going to have a bunch of other actions. We have the index action responsible for listing all the products, the show responsible for retrieving the details of one specific product, and we can also create a product with this action specifically. And this is the syntax for it. You're going to write get, post, put, delete, followed by the URL, the path that you want to access, then the controller name, which is just a regular Elixir function, and then the name of a function inside the controller as an atom, okay? So let's start by creating another route. I'm gonna say slash products. This is going to map to product controller. This is a new one. And then inside that controller, we're going to have an action called index, which is going to be responsible for listing all the products, right? And as you can see here, the product controller is undefined because we have not created it yet. Now let's get some inspiration from the page controller. Let's see what's inside so we can copy. Well, the page controller, as I mentioned, is just a regular Elixir module The only thing that we need to write in order to tell Phoenix that we're dealing with the controller is this line below. You need to write use followed by the name of your application, web, and then controller as an atom. So let's do that. Inside shop web controllers, I'm going to create new file. I'm going to say product. Oops, you guys cannot see it. Underscore controller.ex. Okay, so I'm gonna say def module, enter. We have shop web dot product controller, and then down below we need to write use shop web, and then as an atom controller. Okay, whoops, not this user, that's a typo, I meant use. Okay, let's compare with page controller. That's correct. All right, as I mentioned here, we're going to map that specific request to one function that lives inside the controller. So again, let's grab some inspiration from the page controller. On the page controller, we have one function called home. If we go back to the router, that's exactly what we're doing. We're saying to Phoenix that we have a home function inside page controller. Now, in order for the home function to be an action, a proper action, and for this to work, home needs to accept two parameters. We have the first one, which is the connection. On the connection, you can find many different types of information about the request. And then the second parameter is the params. Here you can find all the information about what's in the URL. So for example, if you have a path param like /products/10 and the ID, you can grab the ID from the params, or maybe you have search params like sort by price. This is how you grab that information from the params. But we're not using the params. That's why you can see an underscore here. All right, so let's go back to the product controller. I said on the router that I need an index function, correct? So let me go to the product controller. I'm gonna say def index. Index needs two parameters, conn. The other one is params, okay? All right, then what? What happens next? Let's go back to the page controller. Apparently, at the end of the controller, we're calling another function called render. So let me go back to the diagram. Okay, so inside the router, we choose one controller and one function specifically to deal with an HTTP request. And then what? Then inside the controller is typically where we query some information from the database, we assign variables, and after we do that, we render a view, as you can see from the page controller. We are rendering apparently a home view inside the home controller, or the page controller, sorry. So, okay, if I go back here, I want to do something similar, right? So I'm gonna say render, and it's conn, the first argument, followed by an atom with the name of the view that we want to render. Here I'm going to say index. All right, if we go back to the page controller, there's a second parameter. It's a keyword list, and it's optional, saying that on the home page, please do not render the default layout. But I don't mind using the default layout for our product controller. So let's leave it as is. And again, we're not using the params. So I'm gonna say we have an underscore here. And actually, I'm gonna show you what's inside conn and params, just so you can finish this video and understand what's going on exactly. So for now, I'm going to comment the conn and index. Now, in order for this to work, I think I need to return the conn here. Let me do some testing. All right, I'm going to say mix phx.server. This command is responsible for initiating the server. Okay. All right. If I go back to localhost, there you go. This is the home page. And we are on the slash route, which is the home page, which goes to the page controller, which renders the home view. Now we want to go to products. All right. This page isn't working. Yeah. As I imagined, we need to call render here, but before we fix this function, I'm just gonna call dbg, which is responsible for debugging in Elixir, and here I'm gonna call dbg conn, just so you can see what's inside the conn. So let me open up this again. Can I clear the terminal? I can't. Okay. All right. I still have the same error that we're going to fix, but watch what's inside the conn. You have a bunch of information about the request. You have cookie, you have, let me scroll up, where's that? Okay, you have query params, query string, remote IP, request cookies, some information about Phoenix view, the path, method, host. So very useful information. Now if I do this again, but for params, all right, if I go back and I re-render the page, and I go back, there we go. For now, we don't have any params, right? We're not querying, for example, products/overwatch, as like the example that I gave. But if I pass some information here on the URL, like products and then sort by price and hit enter, if I go back, there you go. Params is equal to, and then we have a map with all the params that are on the URL. So here we have sort by and price, right? Now I'm gonna remove the dbg and I want to render a view that is called index, and I am not using params for now. All right, so this is pretty similar to our home controller, okay? All right, then what? What is this render function doing? Let's go back to the diagram. On the diagram, all right, supposedly we queried the database, we got all the products from the database, we assigned a couple variables to the view, and then we rendered the view. All right, what exactly is the view? The view, just like the controller, is a regular Elixir module, and then on top, instead of saying use shop web controller, you're gonna write use shop web HTML. That's it. And then we need to follow a specific naming convention for the view. Let's check how it's being implemented by the home page. I'm going to go back. Here we can see that we have the page controller, and where is the view of the page? On the files here, you can find another file called page_html. And this is the convention that we use for the views of a specific controller. You need to use the same name. So for the home page is the page controller. So the view is page HTML. So let's do the same for product controller. I'm going to go back here. I am going to create a new file called product_html.ex. Okay. Then def module, and we need to use capital K's for all the letters here. It's product HTML all uppercase, and then below, instead of writing use shop web controller, here this is a view, so we need to erase this and write HTML. And if you were using live view, for example, as you might think, instead of HTML, you're going to write live view. But for now, we're just using a regular HTML and a regular controller. So there you go. Now, inside this file, the product HTML, there needs to be one specific function. Let me go back to the page controller to show you. Apparently, we're rendering the home view. if I go to the page HTML, actually this is not a good example because we're using sort of a magical function here called embed templates. So I'm gonna ignore this for now, but since we're saying that we're rendering the index view, you need to go back to product.html and then create an index function. That's how you render a view. So we're going to say def index, and what are the specific parameters that a function needs to receive in order to return HTML and in order to become a view or a template or like a component. You need to accept one parameter, which is very similar to the props in React, but on Elixir land, we call them assigns. And then to render a view, we have a JSX-like syntax on Elixir called hex. And in order to use hex, you need to use the H sigil and then this triple quotation mark here. And now you can return whatever you want as your function component. So I'm gonna say H1, this is the product listing page, all right? Now I'm going to go back to my server, and now I'm going to reload the /products, and hopefully it's going to work. And there you go. This is the product listing page. And you might be thinking, whoa, what is this up here? Like we have an icon, we have a couple of links. I don't remember writing any of this. And that's because we're using a layout. Remember, a couple of minutes ago, I told you that on the page controller, we told Phoenix that we did not want to use the layout on the homepage, but we did not use this flag on the product controller. So under the hood, Phoenix adds the layout around your page, okay? Now, this is all you need to know in order to do an entire request and return something to the user, but there is a final refactor that I wanted to do here. And if we go back to the page HTML, I cannot find any home function here. Like, where is the home function? Where's the HTML? I cannot find it. This is where we have like a helper function called embed templates. This is responsible for telling Phoenix something like, hey, Phoenix, I'm not going to embed all the code here. I'm actually going to use a separate file for that. And this is useful if you're creating like an entire page, because, for example, a button component, yeah, that's pretty small. You can add the entire component inside your module. But as this file gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, then it's probably a good idea to have a separate file for this template, right? And this is exactly what the embed templates do. So you're gonna call this function followed by the path to where the file is. So I'm just gonna copy this, go back to my product.html, and then instead of having an inline function, I'm going to use a separate file. So embed templates, and instead of page HTML, I'm gonna say product HTML. And this is a folder, by the way. So we're gonna go back to the files. Inside controllers, we're going to create a new folder called, product HTML. And then inside this folder, you need to name the file exactly as you would on your function. So on page HTML, we're expecting a home function, right? It was supposed to be something like this, but we are using a separate file. So the name of this file is home, and then this weird syntax that we use for front-end files is home.html.hex. So we're going to do the same for product. We need a function called index, right? So I'm gonna go back here. I'm gonna say index dot the extension, which is HTML, dot hex which is like the JSX of Elixir. And then here you can type whatever you want as an HTML. So I'm gonna say again, h1, whoa, Hix is working. And then another one, which is, this is the product listing page. All right, now you're going to hit Ctrl S or Command S on your keyboard, and then voila, there's hot code reloading for Phoenix. You don't need to manually go here and press refresh every time you change your front end. Nope, you don't need that. You just go here, you edit your file, and then once you save, the page is automatically updated. No unnecessary pressing of the reload button on your browser. All right, so we created the product listing page. Let me close all the other files that we're not using. How about we do the same thing again so we can practice and so I can show you how we can have a dynamic page, for example. So I'm gonna close all of the files that I created. And now inside here of the scope of the router, I'm gonna say that I want another route, which is /products/ I'm gonna say ID. You need to use this syntax followed by the controller that you want to use. Here is the same product controller. And now instead of index, I'm gonna say that I want the show function. All right. So let me go inside product controller. I'm gonna do the same thing. Now instead of using an index function, I'm gonna use another one called show. The show function is going to render the show view. So I'm gonna replace this again. All right. So if I go back to the product HTML, we are using a separate a separate folder to embed the templates. So what we need to do is go back to product HTML, create a new file once again, and this time it's going to be called show.html.hix. And now I'm gonna say h1, this is the product ID equals, and this is it for now. We're going to complete soon. All right, we have the product listing page. If I go to the URL and I type /products/9, for example, okay, this is the product page. I'm gonna change here the product page where ID equals. All right, and how do we get the ID from the URL? Well, I mentioned a couple of minutes ago that we have the params. So let's try that. I'm gonna go back, and inside my product controller, this is where we have access to the params, right? So now I need the params. I'm gonna remove the underscore, and there are a couple of ways of extracting the params. First, let me do a DBG on the params and see if this is working. All right, let me reload. And there you go. Here you can find params. It's a map. And inside that map, we have a string field called the ID, and the value of that field is 9. So how do we get the ID? You can do something like this. ID equal params, and then ID. Is this going to work? Yes. You can even DBG this to see if it's working. Whoops, let me go back. All right, ID 9, it works, but this is not the Elixir way. How about we do some pattern matching? We can do some pattern matching directly here. So on the params, I'm gonna say that I am expecting a map. On this map, I am expecting an ID, and I'm going to bind that ID to an ID variable. So I'm gonna say ID. All right, now we have the ID. How do I pass that ID to my HTML? There are a couple of ways. The easiest one that we're going to use now, and I'm gonna explain the other ways on a future video, is as a third argument of the render function, you can pass the assigns. And the assigns are just a keyword list with all the props that you want to pass to your page. So here we can say ID is equal to ID. All right? This is how you assign a prop to the show page. Now, let me go back to product.html. Oops, I forgot that we're using a separate file. So I'm going to go back to product.html, show. How do I render a variable inside a Higgs file? This is pretty simple. The syntax is a bit different. On JSX, you can just use brackets, but on Higgs, you need to type this weird syntax right here. All right. Now, if you do this, you're going to run Elixir code inside the Higgs, but I want to show something on the page. If you want to run Elixir code and show something on the page at the same time, you need to add an equal sign here. All right. And then, all right, how do I access the assigns? You can say assigns, and then this is a keyword list where the keys are atoms. So you can say assigns.id. Is this going to work? Let's see. There we go. This is the product page where ID equals 9. Let me pass another random number. And there we go. It works. Now, this is a bit ugly. Assigns.id. So every time I want to access a prop on my view, I need to write assigns.id, assigns.product, assigns.name. No, you don't. There's a more beautiful and simpler syntax that you can use here, and that is the @ sign followed by the name of the prop that is inside assigns. So let's see if it works. I'm going to type something random. Okay, this is product page where ID equals random. And there you go. Whenever you want to access a value that is inside the assigns, you can just type @ followed by the name of the prop. Here it's ID, but I can easily go back to the product and say ID and name. The name is, I don't know, Xbox. And then I can go back to show. And then here I can say H2 product name. And then I'm going to copy this. And instead of ID, I'm going to say name. Let's go back. And there you go. This is the product page where the ID is random and the product name is Xbox. Awesome. So I'm going to remove this. I'm not messing around with the HTML file. And then on the controller, I just want to assign the ID, and the ID is coming from the params on the URL, right? So let me go back to the diagram and finish the explanation. We used here the product HTML, right? But what if I wanted to create a JSON API? How can I do that? Well, it's pretty simple actually. Instead of creating a module called ProductHTML, you create one called ProductJSON, and that's it. And then instead of having a function that returns Higgs, you have a function that returns a map. And then that map is later converted to JSON under the hood. And that's it. Now, don't worry, we're going to have a dedicated video just for JSON APIs. And on that video, I'm going to explain and show you how to create a JSON endpoint that responds with JSON. But for now, we're just going to use HTML, and we did not query the database. This is all static. I'm rendering the same page. It doesn't matter the ID. It doesn't matter whatever I pass to the URL. I'm not interacting with the database at all. And another spoiler that I wanted to give you is that I said that inside the controller, we query the products from the database, but this is not entirely true. We actually have something very cool on Phoenix called contexts, which are responsible for isolating your business domain from your view layer, which is pretty much the controller and the HTML. So instead of querying the database inside the controller, we are going to interact with a context, more specifically a product's context. But this is just a spoiler. I just wanted to give you a quick taste of what's coming for this course. And that's it. I'm gonna give you the link for the request lifecycle from the official documentation. It's really good. I highly recommend you to read it alongside watching this video. All right? But that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.